Hey there, this is Dan and you're watching the Salty Sea. And today I want to talk about how to get into Age of Sigmar or Warhammer in general. And I want to do it a little differently than you normally see because there's a lot of really great resources out there for, talking about what are the best budget boxes and which start collecting boxes are best for getting into the game and like how do you choose a faction, all of that. But I really want to talk about like literally how do you physically get into Age of Sigmar and again Warhammer in general because um, there's a lot of things that I wish I'd known years ago when I started playing, and a big part of this video is, me advocating for Warcry as a game to help you get into this hobby in general. Whoops, I guess I should tell you what Warcry is, shouldn't I? Warcry is the GW skirmish game set in the Mortal Realms, same place that Age of Sigmar is set. Um, it's pretty fast paced, usually between anywhere from 5 to 15, but usually you're going to see 7, 8, 9, 10 models per side. And, mostly melee combat. You can see kind of a scattering of terrain all around the game board. And it's really sort of merging sort of almost board game type of aesthetics with sort of the brutality of the Warhammer universe. And just like any other Games Workshop game, it comes complete with its own set of terrible optional dice that you can buy. Let's just get into it. So the first thing that I think a lot of people who aren't sort of all the way invested in the hobby, um, they know but they haven't experienced yet, is that painting an entire army is really hard. Um, it will often take a lot of people like a year, 2 years. A lot of the time, the sort of this happened to me. The first few models I painted, they were the Seraphon Start Collecting box, the one with all the Saurus. Uh, they were painted so much worse than what I could paint 3 months after that I could barely look at them, right? So you improve so much in those first 6 months to a year of painting, and then it just takes a long time, right? When you're first starting painting, one thing I don't see enough of in painting tutorials and paint tube in general for this miniature hobby is just an understanding of just how hard painting is for someone who hasn't really done it before. Um, and that takes a lot of time to paint an entire 2,000 point army. I think GW has done a really good job lately, starting with 9th edition 40K of, you know, uh, increasing the points on all of the units to make armies smaller in general, to make the hobby less daunting, but it's still pretty extreme. Um, I just put together my Dominion box, and there's just a lot of models in there. I think if I were a new player just buying that box thinking I was getting into the game, um, I think it would be really tough. So there's a huge time commitment to painting, and so that you often don't feel like you're actually starting the hobby until you've got a year of work ahead of you before you can even do it, and that can be really daunting, and it can cause a lot of burnout. Um, and so one of the things that you really need to do for yourself is figure out a way to find joy from your models um, before you've actually put them on the table for a giant army versus army matchup. So, one way that a lot of people say is, like a lot of my local game stores have like just 1,000 point tournaments, right? So that you can do it when you're only halfway done. But even painting 1,000 points is still a lot. Um, and that's the first place where I think Warcry really comes in is you can just put very few models onto a board, right? The first 8 that you've painted, and that can happen without burnout really easily in a way that just painting an entire army can't. The next thing is that finding places to play, it varies wildly from person to person, right? Some people get into the game because they have friends who are trying to get them into it, and so you immediately have someone to play with. Other people get into the game because they just think the setting is really cool, or maybe they played the Total War video games and thought they wanted to try painting the models too. Um, and sometimes, depending on where you live, it can be really difficult to find an LGS with sort of a regularly occurring and friendly game, right? Big tournaments are generally advertised really widely and broadly, and they're pretty easy to find, but they're kind of garbage for learning the game. And you'll find a lot of people, there are major AOS content creators who will not be named, who've said things like new players just shouldn't be at my tournaments. And that makes it really difficult if you're somewhere where maybe your LGS, you want to play AOS, but your LGS only does 40K, or maybe they only do card games, right? Maybe it's just like Magic and Pokemon and just that's their scene. Um, that's another reason why I really want to advocate for Warcry as a great game to get into it, because you really only need so few things. It's just easier to set up a game real quick with your family, get set up, sort of convince friends to play it, because you can just have it set up so quickly that they can come over to play a board game, and after the board game's done, you can just play a quick Warcry game, something like that. And so getting into that, you also see the sort of narrative is really lined up perfectly, especially with the new AOS edition. Um, the Warcry campaigns, they do sort of a 12 battle narrative for your warband, which has a leader, and then you end with 1,400 points of stuff, which kind of dovetails really nicely. Usually, the amount of boxes that you need to make 1,400 points, you would come sort of right up to that 600 point AOS threshold where Path to Glory starts, which really just makes them a perfect fit together. I definitely think that they wrote the current Path to Glory rules, especially with the way that your hero kind of levels up over time. It's a perfect continuation of the Warcry campaign situation that they have in those books. So I think that that's a perfect narrative way to start a Force 2, is coming from the game. And then also, you do need materials for Warcry, so I can see that as a potential trap. But I think that another one of the things that you really need for AOS that isn't necessarily communicated is a lot of the stuff that comes with Warcry, right? So the first one is terrain. Um, the Warcry starter sets come with a ton of terrain, as do a lot of just terrain boxes that have the Warcry uh, sort of label on them. And those fit into AOS perfectly. And you sort of have a problem in the AOS meta right now that a lot of people have identified that tournaments in general just don't have enough terrain. There's a really bad sort of shooting magic ranged meta going on, sort of at the end of 2.0, that, maybe has been solved in 3.0, maybe not. But I've seen multiple people, shout out to Warhammer Weekly for doing a really good job showing this off, but multiple people showing that if you have enough terrain, the correct amount of terrain on your board, that the all shooty meta just doesn't have to be a problem. And I think that Warcry is an excellent place to get into AOS for that reason, because um, A- Warcry sort of dictates a bunch of terrain to you. So if you play Warcry first, you're going to have enough terrain just in your collection um, to get into that. Now, some people, you can just have an army and you just plan to only play at your local game store, so you don't need terrain anyway, and that's fine. But then the same is true for Warcry. You don't have to buy the terrain for Warcry either. Um, the books, the book pressure for Warcry, there are a lot of books out there, but you really only need two, right? You'll just need the Warcry core book and then one of the GA books, whichever one corresponds to the force that you're going to be starting. And depending on which force you are doing, so for example, if you want to do Lumineth or Soulblight Gravelords, uh, those cards are all shown in a free PDF um, on the Warhammer community site. So you actually don't even need a book to play those two factions. Now, again, for places to play, um, there are fewer Warcry tournaments, right? So that's one of the really easy ways to find AOS games. But those are just so horrible for new players that usually you're better off playing at home or showing up to your LGS if you have it. Warcry is just easier to bring the stuff to your LGS if people there aren't really playing a ton, um, or easier to just set up at home. Um, So I think that that can be a really huge benefit. So let's talk specifically again about building, painting, actually physically getting into the game, right? So your hobby process when you start off, when I started off, is sort of you start off just kind of exploring the factions, you pick a couple factions you like, and then you're just kind of building one and painting one, and you're just kind of seeing what sticks, right? At least that's how it was for me. And one of the ways that you can just make the hobby process, especially the early part of the hobby process, much more manageable is by having what a lot of business folks call minimum viable product, right? So that's the idea that um, your miniature, the first stepping stone, you can actually do something with that stepping stone. Um, and then as you climb up into sort of the biggest version of what you're doing, right? Say, for example, a 2000 point AOS list, you have things to do along the way. Um, I think that that can be really important for stopping burnout as you sort of start playing because um, this sort of happened to me as I started painting Seraphon things. It just felt like I was never going to get to 2000 points. It just felt like an impossibly daunting task for the first force I ever did. And I think that that deters a lot of people. And that's why I think that um, Warcry is just the perfect game for giving you this bridge to, you can usually create a Warcry list by buying 2 boxes and then painting up half of what's in each box. So if you have a little bit of ADD with painting, like I do, I just have a tough time painting the same thing over and over and over. Warcry is perfect for that because you only have to paint a couple models from a given set. And then you can just play that to your heart's desire. Um, and then a lot of factions, there's sort of multiple different lists that you can make that uh, roll up to the same AOS faction. Or you can just start a campaign and then add on to your list over the course of the campaign, and then end up with the smallest available AOS list, right? And then the fact that Path to Glory starts as this really great narrative way to get into Age of Sigmar at 600 points. That's sort of perfectly where Warcry leaves off as you're getting into it. So this lets you just kind of paint and play at the same time. So you never really feel like you're just painting with no like finish line in sight, right? Because you're getting to the finish line with every model that you paint. Because as long as you're playing these skirmish games, Warhammer Underworlds can be a really good, even sort of baby step before Warcry. That can be a really good set too. You're creating these finish lines as you paint every single model. Um, so I want to talk about some great example factions for starting this transition. And the first is Auric War Clans. And one of the things that makes it so great is that um, Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters and now Cruel Boys, they all roll up to the same, um, the same AOS army. You can stick them all together in an army, but they're all different for the purposes of Warcry. So we don't have the Cruel Boys Warcry rules yet, but they will be getting them probably in the next month or so. But for now, we do have different Iron Jaws warbands and Bone Splitters warbands that you can make really cheaply and quickly that then actually use the same models that are good in Age of Sigmar. So if you just get an Iron Jaws Start Collecting and a Bone Splitters, just the Savage Orc box, you have 2 Warcry bands that can play against each other in games sort of at home or at your LGS that'll eventually go into the same army. So you can create these 2 lists here. So this War Chanta plus Gore Grunta plus 5 Ard Boys list, or this 1 box list, which this 1 box list only uses, I believe, 9 of the Savage Orcs that come in that box, and things like More Boys, Savage Orcs, Savage Arrow Boys, those have a minimum unit size of 10, so you can have this list, and then you still have 10 elsewhere in the box that then you can make into a unit for Age of Sigmar. So that's exactly what I've done then to sort of show you what those boxes turn out to be in AOS, right? So if you start building and painting just the models you need for these 2 lists, you can be playing the game right away, you know, within weeks after you've first made your first purchase. And then you have this list of a War Chanter, 10 Ard Boys, 3 Gore Gruntas, 2 Savage Big Stabbas, and 10 Savage Arrow Boys. Um, right now, in meta Auric War Clans lists, uh, the War Chanter, along with War Docs from Bone Splitters, are considered the best support heroes. So you have one of those. Um, Big Stabbas and Arrow Boys and Ard Boys and Gore Gruntas, all 4 of those see competitive play fairly regularly. So you have a great base here from which to start playing. And also, this is 700, I think, low 700s points right here. Never do math while recording or live. 700 or so points here, that's enough to start a Path to Glory campaign. And so you can then start just very slowly adding in new things to your army that then again you have a new finish line with every single box you buy. So that makes this a great base for an Auric War Clans army for you to sort of paint these up, play Warcry while you're painting them, and then all of a sudden you're playing AOS and adding to your force as you're playing games. I think that that's one of the best ways to do it so that so that you don't burn out. Um, some other really easy factions to do the exact same thing with are any of the 4 Chaos Gods. Like Auric War Clans, all the 4 Chaos Gods are split into 2 Warcry factions that end up folding up into one AOS army. So if you, I think Khorne's the easiest one to do that with. So if you want to do a Khorne Demons Warcry band and a Khorne Mortals Warcry band, those will eventually just go into the same army, and so you'll be playing games as you're building this pretty big base from which to create an army. The same is true of Stormcast, and Stormcast have the bonus that Aether Wings are really good in both games right now. So painting a decent number of Aether Wings with your Vanguard Raptors will get you a Warcry list. And then a lot of Stormcast lists right now. Now, they do have a new book coming out. We'll see what's good in that book. But at least for now, a lot of them run a bunch of Vanguard Raptors and then a base of either Sequitors or Liberators. Um, which go in different Warcry factions. You can check out my starter lists videos for that. So they just roll naturally into one AOS force. Flesh Eater Courts is a really good example. I'll link down below in the description and hopefully also up in the right for this video of really good budget ways to get into the game. But Flesh Eater Courts is one of the very best ways to get into Warcry on a budget and then also get into AOS on a budget, because the Start Collecting box makes a really competitive Warcry list that's really powerful. And then just buying 2 more makes a full army. So it's really easy to just, with the exact same, just 3 easy purchases, you're first playing Warcry, then as you continue painting, you're adding more into it in just a really tight, smooth way. Soulblight Gravelords, specifically Legion of Blood, requires a ton of skeletons or Graveguard in all the Age of Sigmar lists that you can make with that Legion. And those are coincidentally just really good in Warcry, so it gives you a perfect base to start from. All right, so there's a quick guide on what it looks like to sort of start painting up models and then transition, starting with Warcry, going into AOS. I just wanted to put this out here just to change the conversation a bit. I've just been very dissatisfied with a lot of sort of guides on how to start getting into Age of Sigmar, because I just think that the way we can't, as sort of experienced and franchised players, sort of tell people to get into it with the perspective that we now have. I think it's really important to, um, when you're physically actually doing the hobby, I think it's really important to have things to do with your hobby along the way. And I think that Warcry is an awesome game. You can check out more of the channel for all sorts of Warcry content about, why I think it's so great. But I just wanted to put this out here to just show that even if you're interested in the big game that is sort of the most promoted game for the fantasy setting right now, um, I just wanted to put this out to just show the best way to sort of ease yourself into that side of the hobby. Um, I hope this has been helpful. Let me know if it has been in the comments, or even if it wasn't, and that you wish I'd included some more stuff. I'd be happy to take a look and then maybe add more to a video sometime in the future. Um, so until then, may all your rolls be crits.